welcome to INTV Live on Invicta News. I'm Alina Baimuhanova. Here are your top stories on Friday, the 28th of May. Keeping the conversation going, anti-racism campaigners hold march in Rochester. Can hallucinogenics help with depression? New study found that it compounds better mental health than a leading antidepressant. Whitestalk babies have hatched. We took a look at the new chicks in the conservation program in Wildwood Trust. And in sport, the Champions League final kicks off tomorrow as Chelsea takes on Manchester City. We'll continue protesting until seismic change is made. That's the message from Medway campaigners who gathered for a stand-up to racism meet on the anniversary of George Floyd's death. Just this morning, the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement resigned over controversy of her finances. However, protesters were still out in full force to tackle racial equality in Kent, but even the youngest participants admit there's still a long way to go. Leisha Gallagher has our top story.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter!
A sign of hope, a symbol of togetherness, and an important chant for change. The Black Lives Matter movement has captured the world in the last year, and Kent is no exception. On the anniversary of George Floyd's death in America, residents in Rochester gathered for a stand-up to racism march to pay their respects and to continue the conversation. Despite the resignation of the Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors this morning, people of all ages, genders and ethnicities gathered for the same cause, a fight for racial equality throughout the community.
Yes, it's been a year. We've seen justice served in terms of the police officers have brought to justice and have been convicted, but we still have a long, long way away from what needs to happen here in the United Kingdom.
Wherever we are, Black lives does matter. Whether it's in London, whether it's in America, whether it's in Australia, in Nigeria, here in the UK, Black lives does matter. The amount of wealth that we have actually contributed to the economy of this nation, people don't look at that.
In a moment of silence, the group took the knee in the pouring rain to remember George Floyd, which proved to be a catalyst and a forceful cry for change.
It's been a year and it's disgraceful that there hasn't been the change we want to see. So it's really important to come today and remember him, but also look to the future of what more we need to do.
I think it was really good coming in today because it proves that we're not going to be overlooked. And I think that young people especially find other ways to protest, whether that's on social media, because sometimes it can be hard to get to a protest if you're so young.
The protest here at Jackson's Field in Rochester may not have had the biggest turnout, but from the passers-by on the busy A2 behind me, their enthusiasm was audible.
Thank you! Thank you!
Considering that it's rained, it was raining while we were taking the knee, so it's good that people still thought that, they will come out and stand for something. So I'm encouraged.
With placards high and fists in the air, the campaigners are hopeful that they can continue to make an impact and create a positive move to racial equality in Kent and beyond. Leisha Gallagher, Invicta News.
There are concerns over the future of LGBTQ+ rights after UK Equalities Minister Liz Truss said they disbanded the Governmental Advisory Board over disagreements. Members of the LGBT Advisory Board resigned as they felt the minister and Kemi Badenoch were not taking their advice when it came to gender recognition. This is what former Advisory Board member Jane Ozan had to say.
Called on Kemi Badenoch to consider her position. I think the fact that she chose to meet with the LGBTQ Alliance, which is a fiercely anti-trans group, as a member of the advisory panel, I also would have hoped to have met with her. So you have to ask if she's meeting one group who are pretty anti, and yet she's not meeting those of us who need protecting. You have to ask, why is she doing that?
A documentary released by the BBC followed an Imperial College London study that found that hallucinogenic drugs lowered depression more quickly and in greater strength than a leading antidepressant. Rodri Andrews has been investigating the substance's potential medicinal benefits.
The Imperial College London study that featured in BBC Two's documentary looked into the use of psilocybin, the psychoactive compound found in magic mushrooms. However, this is just one of many research projects on the topic across the world. Rotem Petranka is the director of the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science, who's been researching microdosing. This is the practice of regularly consuming very small doses of psychedelic drugs. His research found that participants who did this had less negative emotions and dysfunctional attitudes. He suggests that we may not be that far from seeing psychedelics more widely used as treatment.
There's a mental health crisis that's enveloping the whole Western world. And I think mental health professionals are at a loss and governments are at a loss, and they're like, well, we'll try whatever.
The most popular psychedelic substances are all Class A drugs. I did, however, speak to someone who was willing to discuss their experiences of consuming psilocybin for mental health purposes.
It was one of the most life-changing things that's ever happened to me. After you take a big dose like that, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you've got this sense of well-being and like all your depression's gone and everything.
For him, the experience he had on his first trip actually revived his relationship with his daughter. He realised he had been drifting from her.
It just came into my head that all she wanted was a hug of her dad, and then the whole thing just changed to like a massive carnival and like this colours you've never seen, love you've never experienced, you've never seen it, and it's the most profound thing that's ever happened to me. And since that time, my bonding with daughter is perfect.
Psychedelic drugs are not a magic pill, however, and regulating them is key. Petranka believes that the success of the treatment is individual to the patient's needs.
People with certain disorders or dispositions that should be particularly careful about psychedelics, like people with a family history of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. But I think there are also individual differences. I don't think that it will work equally well for everyone. And I think that that's a dangerous notion that people who stand to profit from it are advancing.
Part of the problem in identifying who such treatments would work for is that the research is not yet there.
Almost all of the research that we're talking about has been done on relatively wealthy, relatively stable people. Once we start administering psychedelics to people who have severe mental health disorders with complex presentations, I think it'll be much more difficult to assess who should get it and how and when and whether it will work for them.
Until that research has been conducted, it's important to remember that these substances are potentially dangerous outside of controlled conditions. Roger Andrews, Invicta News.
Worldwide protests are set to continue to highlight the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. Despite a ceasefire being called last week, tensions are still high between the two states. Felix Reeves has more.
Protests are continuing across the UK in support of Palestine after the continuing violence in Gaza and the West Bank. It's estimated that over 200,000 people have joined the protests in the UK over the past few weeks, highlighting the importance of support for peace in the region. A ceasefire was called last Friday after the fighting caused more than 250 deaths, prompting the global marches for an end to the conflict. During the protests, there have been many guest speakers, including Palestinian artists, poets, and activists. Even former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has participated in the protests.
Solidarity with the people of Al-Aqsa.
The UN Human Rights Council have voted to investigate violence on both sides after Israel accused Hamas of firing rockets into Jerusalem. Hiba Barat is the executive director of Law for Palestine and spoke about how the tensions have been high in recent years.
This is actually the fourth time that Israel attacks Gaza with prohibited weapons and heavy weapons. Let alone the prolonged violations of international law and international humanitarian law in East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank.
The conflict started in 1948 when the UN attempted to split the former British colony of Palestine into two different countries. There has never been a peace agreement, and it has looked like a two-state solution is impossible. The most recent round of fighting started after some Palestinian families were being threatened with eviction in the region of Sheikh Jarrah, a predominantly Palestinian neighbourhood in East Jerusalem. The tensions were worsened by the police storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam, on the final Friday of Ramadan. It's been estimated that more than 300 Palestinians were injured by Israeli forces using tear gas and stun grenades. Dr. Nadia Nassar Najab is a lecturer of Palestinian studies at Exeter University and commented on the potential for further fighting.
I don't think this is going to be the last war. I don't think that this is going to stop. It will carry on, because as long as Israel is grabbing the land of Palestinians, trying to replace Palestinians will resist.
In the fighting, Israel's Iron Dome rocket defense system was deployed to stop the attacks from Hamas. Amid the rocket attacks, a building was destroyed in Gaza, which housed Al Jazeera and Associated Press journalists. With the protests around the world set to continue, people will be marching in hope of finding a solution to the conflict. Felix Reeves, Invicta News.
That's all for now. Don't forget to follow Invicta News on our social platforms. We'll be back after this short break.
Okay, 2 minutes on break. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cue.
Welcome back to INTV Live on Invicta News. Surgeons across the UK are calling for specialist hubs to help tackle a backlog of non-urgent operations due to COVID-19. Our health correspondent, Leisha Gallagher, joins us now. So Leisha, hospitals have obviously been very busy over this past year with COVID patients, but how has this been impacting waiting times?
Yes, so more than 436,000 people were on the waiting list for non-urgent surgery for more than a year. That's compared to more than 1,600 last year before the pandemic, so clearly quite a big rise there. Actually, in March, 5 million people were on that waiting list for non-urgent surgery, and that's the highest number since medical records began. But a big case that's come out this week is that of Demi Jones from Love Island. She was diagnosed with thyroid cancer at just 22 years old. And she had an appointment booked in October, which she claims was pushed back because of the pandemic, and that was for non-urgent surgery. But she had to be quite forceful, demand that appointment, and when she did finally get it, she found out she had cancer and had to have emergency surgery to remove it. But I think this case does really highlight why it is so important that the NHS is able to cut back on these waiting times, because people with serious illnesses could be being missed.
Yeah, that's very stressful and upsetting for people who do have those health concerns. But how exactly would these specialist hub work to relieve that?
So these specialist hubs would be in around 40 of the existing NHS buildings across the UK, and they would be purely just for non-emergency surgery, just to try and reduce that risk of infection to other areas of the hospital. But they would bring all of the specialist surgeons under one roof there, and they think that this would mean greater efficiency and better use of operating theatres, but it could mean that people do need to travel a little bit further than their local hospital. But the big thing is that this would cost the government around £1 billion extra in funding every year, so quite a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a large amount of money. So hopefully we'll have to wait and see how this goes on in Parliament. Lisha, thanks very much indeed. Russia has denied entry to Air France and Austrian Airlines after they plan to avoid flying over Belarus to get to Moscow. The two European airlines had to cancel services as their flight plans were rejected by Russia. This is following the announcement from EU leaders to European carriers to avoid Belarusian airspace this week after a Ryanair plane was forced to divert and land in Minsk on Sunday. With live music performances on the horizon, female and gender minority musicians may have a harder time this season, with festivals struggling to maintain gender diversity. Ayome Comadecayero has been speaking to those in the industry.
With restrictions easing, the music world is starting to return to normality, yet festivals continue to have poor gender diversity within their lineups. The F list was created to combat this issue. The list helps organisers book UK female musicians for their events. Their founder Vic Bain created this list during the pandemic to remove excuses for festival planners for lack of diversity.
I think people increasingly are getting a bit bored with the same four white guys playing guitars. It's just not acceptable to have lineups which are, less than 10% female musicians on stage. I think they are going to be left behind.
The Guardian recently analysed 31 music festivals planned for this year. One festival, Creamfields, featured over 90% male artists in their lineup. Aspiring musician told Invicta News that she believes the music industry is getting better at covering up its negative side, rather than improving for female artists. She said, "People want to say how disgusting the treatment of artists is, but no one wants to actually get involved. It's hard to believe things are genuinely changing." Loud Women is a not-for-profit organisation that organises an annual one-day festival to support female and other gender minority artists. Their founder, Cassie Fox, says fundamental change is needed before we will see more diversity at big festivals.
Until, who's actually running the music industry starts changing, we might actually start seeing some changes kind of trickling down to our festival lineups.
Loud Woman recently released a single featuring 64 female and non-binary artists to raise money for Women's Aid. The single, titled Reclaim the Streets, was written in response to the sad deaths of Sarah Everard and Blessing Olusegun. At their core, Loud Women ensured that their events are safe environments.
Usual gig environments don't feel like spaces where a woman can just go by herself and enjoy the music. That's something that we've been really keen to foster in Loud Women events.
This problem may still be vibrant in the music industry, but more and more people are becoming aware of it and advocating for change. Ayome Comadecayero, Invicta News.
Coastal property prices are rising as the pandemic is causing people to seek a calmer location. Residents in littoral areas have been negatively impacted by this trend. Amber Sunner has the story.
Prices of coastal properties have soared by 40% over the pandemic. As working from home becomes the norm, more people are moving away from big cities like London to be nearer to the sea. Estate agents are predicting this trend to continue.
The last 10 years, house prices in London have been increasing at a rather rapid rate. I think people are just looking to move to areas where they can afford to live more comfortably. Definitely we've seen increase in properties in areas such as Kent along the coast. I think with people realising that they can work from home and not have to commute every day, there's definitely been an increase in people looking to move to those sort of areas, which is good because it will obviously help the economy in places like Herne Bay, Medway, Margate and places like that.
Coastal areas may be thriving, but those trying to sell their houses in built-up areas are finding it a lot harder.
UK house sales are forecasted to leap by almost half this year as the boom continues, but some people are lowering their prices.
I managed to find the buyer. So 2 days later, when the lockdown happened, buyer actually changed their mind. Even I lowered the price of the property to help me to sell the house, but it did not work as people didn't want to come out to view the property as what was the country, not the country, actually the whole world was going through with the COVID-19 situation. So I had to take the house off the market because I couldn't sell. So it was a quite bad experience.
The seaside retreat is becoming a permanent escape for many as bustling cities slowly begin to fizzle out. For Amber Sonner, Invicta News.
It's been 5 years since Harambe was killed at Cincinnati Zoo. In May 2016, a western lowland gorilla called Harambe was shot by a zoo worker after a 3-year-old boy climbed into his enclosure. We're looking back at the incident and how the zoo is doing today with Felix Reeves' report.
It's been 5 years since the tragic killing of Harambe, a 17-year-old western lowland gorilla at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio. He was shot after a 3-year-old boy fell into the gorilla enclosure, causing Harambe to be startled and start dragging the young boy around. Countless conservationists and animal lovers were up in arms over his death and called for more care to be given to the critically endangered species. Penny Banham of the Born Free Foundation said, "Maintaining animals on display in zoos is an inefficient way to generate funds and may be a distraction from the real need to focus on genuine conservation in the wild." Gorilla numbers have been increasing in recent years, thanks to the work of groups like the Diane Fossey Fund. They are currently in the process of finishing the Ellen DeGeneres campus,
Start building.
which will act as a permanent home for the foundation, as Veronica Viccellio explains.
All the visitors that come to see the gorillas and they go through the Rwandan government, they will have a space where they can have spend time to learn more about the gorillas, to learn more about the work to protect them.
The coronavirus pandemic has undoubtedly had a deep impact on the state of gorilla conservation, as zoologist and gorilla expert Tanya Humler explains.
This COVID period has really challenged a lot of NGOs and organizations to rethink and to some extent their sort of dependence and reliance on tourism funding.
There is a hope that once COVID is over, gorilla conservation will hit new heights to protect the species. Felix Reeves, Invicta News.
And in sport, the Champions League final kicks off tomorrow as Chelsea takes on Manchester City. I'm joined by our sports correspondent, Rodri Andrews. So Rodri, what's the build-up looking like for the match tomorrow?
Well, at the moment, the media are really focusing on these two key battles, and that's Guardiola versus Tuchel, as Guardiola's already got 2 Champions League titles with Barcelona. But Tuchel managed to get to the final with PSG last year, although lost to Bayern Munich, so they're both trying to add to their tallies. But then you've also got this other battle between Mason Mount and Phil Foden. These are 2 young English talents who are really looking to prove themselves, and this could be their chance to win a huge trophy, both at such a young age. And it could reflect how much time they get when it comes to the Euros this summer.
Well, there's a lot of exciting things going on there, but tell me, is there anything else happening in the world of football?
Well, at the moment, a lot of the focus is being taken away from the Champions League final because of all the drama, managerial drama. Pirlo has been fired by Juventus. Zidane for Real Madrid resigned yesterday. Conte left Inter Milan despite winning the title this year. And Tottenham, of course, are looking for a replacement for Jose Mourinho. And so that leaves a lot of opportunities for them. They could even, though, go back to Pochettino, who left in 2019. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with that. Then you've also had news that Ryan Giggs' trial date for his accusations by his wife of abuse, that trial date has now been set. And Neymar de Santos has been fired from Nike after allegations of sexual assault.
Well, that's a lot of news in football, Rodri, but tell me, what's happening in cricket? Kent aren't playing until next week, but how are their group rivals doing today?
Well, at the moment, the two teams above Kent, it's quite a close match. We're only in the second day, so it's hard to tell which way that one's going to go. Kent are bottom anyway, so with a game ahead, so it's unlikely to make any difference for Kent. But the really interesting match is the top two teams, which is Yorkshire and Lancashire, the Battle of the Roses. And Yorkshire have actually been bowled out for just 159. And now Lancashire are actually 246 for 2. So that means that they are going to go into that second innings with a very strong lead.
Well, we're wishing the very best for our team from Kent. Thank you, Rodri. US sportswear giant Nike announced its separation with Brazilian footballer Neymar because of his refusal to cooperate in a sexual assault investigation against him. This alleged incident happened in 2016 and reported to Nike 2 years later. Nike ended one of its most high-profile sponsorship deals with the sportsman last August, but gave no reason for the split until their announcement last night. And finally, 3 white stork chicks have hatched at the Wildwood Trust in Herne Bay, and visitors have been traveling miles to visit. The species have not been in the Kent countryside for more than 600 years, but these chicks are part of a conservation program to be released back into the wild. Alicia Gallagher has been to visit.
For many, the white stork is an iconic bird known for being the bearer of babies. But now they've had little chicks of their own at the Wildwood Trust in Herne Bay, and visitors have been travelling miles to catch a glimpse. The resident pair were coupled as part of a conservation programme last year, and for the first time ever at the Trust, this breeding programme is now well underway.
Wasn't quite expecting eggs this soon, but yeah, they laid a clutch of eggs this year that have hatched out already, so we're hoping to potentially in the future look towards setting up maybe a colony here and working with conservation projects like the Whitestalk project potentially, or other different ones.
There are currently 3 baby stork chicks in the nest behind me. Unfortunately, this is as close as we can get right now because they're still very small, but the hope is that they can grow stronger here at the Wildwood Trust and then be released back into the wild.
First time that we've ever bred this species here at Wildwood, so it's a really exciting opportunity for us to view how the birds are behaving. We've got public in who are really engaged with them, so they're doing extremely well. So mum and dad taking it turns on the nest at the moment. They've got to a really healthy size. 2 of them hatched out a lot sooner than the third one, so we've got 2 really large ones and one that's quite a lot smaller but is catching up quite rapidly. The most important thing for us is to make sure we're providing enough food for those chicks. Mum and dad can feed them and we leave them alone. That's the important thing.
And feeding time at the zoo comes 5 times a day for these growing birds to ensure the new family are all strong enough in the first few weeks.
So they'll eat meat mainly, insects, amphibians, small mammals as well, so a wide variety of different meats basically.
Rewilding white storks is a big target for conservation parks across Kent and the South East, with the first eggs from wild birds laid just 2 weeks ago.
We would love to contribute to wild populations of white storks in Wildwood. We'd love to do that. The Knepp Estate in Sussex has bred them. They've got big platforms up, and we've actually had some of their youngsters flying over this park last summer. So certainly birds that we breed in the future at Wildwood, we'd love to think will contribute to that project.
With fluffy grey fur and cute little beaks, these chicks will definitely continue to be a star attraction at the Trust until they eventually fly the nest. Alicia Gallagher for Invicta News.
You've been watching INTV live on Invicta News. Don't forget you can always keep up to date with the latest news across Kent and the world by logging onto our website and our social media platforms. But from me, for now, that's all. Have a good evening. Goodbye.